Hello, and welcome to your Balkanweek. The big news item this week is the issuance by the International Criminal Court of an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin, with a set of charges linking him to war crimes, crimes against humanity, related to the forced deportation of children from Ukraine. I want to look a little bit at this charge, and especially ask the question of what the experience of the trial of another head of state for gross violations of international humanitarian law can show us about this case. Because Slobodan Milošević was charged with similar crimes, we do not have a verdict in that case because he died before the verdict could be reached, but there are some things that can be shown. So first, let's talk about the charges against Putin in the case. And I think we can probably answer the question, were the crimes that he is being charged with committed? It looks as though they were. We don't know how good the evidence is that the court has. Were the crimes that were committed ordered on the part of the Russian Federation and on the part of the President of Russia, Vladimir Putin? This is going to depend on the quality of the evidence. What we have is evidence of the systematic character of crimes that might lead us to believe that they were ordered, but a number of courts have found that the systematic character of crimes is not sufficient evidence to show that there was an intent to commit crimes. And in order to show that the crimes can be traced to Vladimir Putin, it's necessary to show intent. So a lot is going to depend on the quality of the evidence that prosecutors have available. They probably don't have available now everything that they intend to use. Clearly the judge thought that there was enough to prepare charges and to issue a warrant. Now, if we want to look at another case of a head of state being tried for crimes that were comparable, although the scale of these crimes is much smaller, I think it might be instructive to look at the case of Slobodan Milošević. The first thing that we can say, looking at the case of Slobodan Milošević, the first charges filed against him were filed in 1999. He wasn't arrested and extradited to the International Criminal Tribunal until 2001, that is, until he was out of power. In general, there is no reason to imagine that any head of state who is in power is going to be arrested and sent to a tribunal. Some heads of state have successfully defied tribunals. This has happened with the president of Kenya. Others have simply managed to avoid arrest because they have access to security services, and the international courts do not have access to their own police forces. So generally speaking, if anything happens, it'll happen when he's out of power, and even then it is only likely to happen if the state is willing. There have been some cases in which very powerful states, like the United States, have been able to arrest the former heads of much less powerful states like Panama, and even that wasn't pulled off very easily. These are states where the level of power is much more comparable. Not much is going to happen without the cooperation of states. As to the possibility of a conviction, it would be nice to be able to say, in the case of Slobodan Milošević, that the court reached a verdict and was able to decide on the basis of the evidence presented that he was either guilty or not guilty. They did not, because he died before a verdict could be reached. But here's something that I can say. I can say that it is not certain that the International Criminal Tribunal would have reached a verdict in the case of Milošević, and not because he wasn't guilty of crimes. Or at least not because he wasn't guilty of the crimes in the way that we conventionally understand it as people who consume information and make analyses, because the standards that we use are not the same standards that are used in a court of law, where there is a requirement that a direct connection be shown between the person holding power, intent, and the crimes. So Milošević presented a defense, but let's be honest here, Milošević did not present a very good defense. His defense was largely based on drawing equivalences of political responsibility, which is great for television, but it's not an acceptable argument in a court of law. And the reason it's not an acceptable argument in a court of law is that they're arguments that relate to the guilt or innocence of somebody who is not on trial. So if there was any chance of him being acquitted, it wasn't because of his wonderful defense. It was because it was unclear whether the evidence that was presented by the prosecution would meet the standard that would specifically tie him and his activity or inactivity to the crimes that were committed. This is a very, very high barrier for any prosecutor to meet, and Milošević, like Putin, was often smart enough to let the propaganda, to let the advocacy of crimes be done by other people, be done by propagandists, be done by spokespeople. In Milosevic's case, by people like Šešelj, rather than speaking about them directly. So some other strategy is going to be needed. So what can I say? The fact that charges are filed and that a warrant is issued, this is a matter of progress. This means that evidence of crime is being taken seriously. But we need to be very cautious before we get our hopes up about the possibility of any trial ever taking place, and if a trial does take place, of a sustainable conviction. These moments in law are fascinating for a lot of reasons, but among those reasons is usually not their ability to produce satisfaction. Thank you for listening to this latest update after a long pause of your Balkan week.